What do we do when we want to create value, areas of darkness, in a quick drawing, in a fast sketch? I thought this would be possibly a good subject to try that as one of our daily drawing exercises. Now, because it is just a drawing exercise, we can experiment. We're not trying to create an artwork. We don't have to worry about spoiling something, because this is actually just a learning experience for us. And so we can try and learn, and we try and learn by pushing ourselves and experimenting. But first, we need to get the architectural part of this. Can I say that I basically mapped out the building and began doing the top part of these trees in the 10 minutes. And then I spent another 10 minutes. So this was a 20-minute drawing originally. And the speed up after 10 minutes away from real time goes to 4 times when I really get serious with the bushes and the darker values. So if you want to see those a bit slower, you can use the cog icon that's part of the YouTube console there, and you can slow that down to half speed, which will then make it double speed, which I think is a relatively good pace to see what I'm doing. But first, I need to get this architecture done. I'm using a 0.2 millimeter pen. It's one that I've mentioned before that's started to get a bit scratchy. There's probably not as much ink in it as there once was, and it tends to get a bit blobby at the start of lines. But in some ways, I quite like the how shall I describe it, the visual inconsistencies that this creates. It stops the drawing from looking a little too precise, and in some ways, I feel starts to give me a cross between a pencil, between graphite and ink. Now, you can see me now just move my sheet of paper. What happened was I was looking at this and I suddenly thought, it's all angled. This little box of windows I've drawn is all angled. And this happens to me quite a lot, although normally I realise it before I've done this much, simply because I'm not always sitting straight onto my paper. Sometimes, depending where the lights are and the actual camera is overhead, sometimes it becomes a little bit awkward. And if I rush to start and don't arrange everything properly, because I'm tilted at an angle, I'm no longer drawing vertical lines that are truly vertical or horizontal ones. So a reminder that I really need to make sure I am set up properly before I start, that I'm not twisted. The position of our body is so important for successful drawing, or at least for drawing to the most success we're capable of. But I'm just about done now, this architectural section. I draw the window first and then I'll draw the building around it, because I find it's, in my mind, easier to be accurate doing it that way. Although, as it turns out, I think in this drawing I maybe have drawn the window slightly too large, because I am trying to draw it same size. But now we'll go up, and I make another error going up here. Well, not actually in this part, when I do some of the building around this part. I fail to observe as carefully as I continually exhort you all to, and I am certainly not immune with the sort of what I think of as reasonable inaccuracies that come from lack of observation. And I say reasonable because it's not like what we've drawn as nonsense. We don't have, it's not like some optical illusion where lines and planes and angles look as though they join, but they don't really. But simply that the detail is not where it should be. And it's always good to practice, I think, a good sense of accuracy if in the end we want to create drawings that look realistic, that have a certain sense of realism. We don't have to draw that way, but if we don't, then in some ways it's a very different mental process that we follow. I talk about our reference being a springboard, and if we want to go off into abstraction or some level of abstraction from our reference, then I think we obviously use our reference in a very different way. So probably that gap between that line I've just drawn and the left side of the window could have been just maybe a millimetre or two wider. And so now I come across with this line, and this is where I come to grief, because the second line of that band should go underneath the line I've just drawn, and you're almost about to watch me draw it above it. So it just shifted the sense of balance slightly visually of that pediment. And here I go, yep, popping it in the wrong place. It should go underneath. So it's not the sort of thing that will be obvious to anyone not looking at the reference, but because this is a learning experience, I need to not let it ride. I need to say to myself, yep, I just didn't observe that carefully, and fortunately in this drawing you can probably get away with it, but in another, perhaps not. And now I do another inconsistency. I do that outside line. How do I describe what I've done wrong? I've got two dots for the upper and higher and lower section of the apex, and then I join the lower line on the left hand side with the upper dot, and you can see, so now I've got this diagonal line that I don't want. But at this point I think, well, I'm not going to worry about that anyway, but in this case, because it is a darker colour, I can actually hatch over that, not for any darkness of shade or shadow, but for the darker colour. And that's going to completely obliterate that diagonal line. And now I hastily put these lines here and realise as soon as I've put the left-hand one, it's too far away from the centre. Again, I was going from my memory of what I'd seen, and I didn't actually observe what was actually there. And so now these two are going to be wider apart than the rest of them. I could have done all of them too far apart, but I thought that would actually start having them all look too close together, too evenly spaced, instead of groups of pairs. And I have decided already that I'm not going to hatch any of the shadows for under the eaves that we see, particularly on the right hand side. And my apex of this wall of the gable end goes up a little bit too high, I think. So it's a bit too tall and pointy, a triangle that we have on top. Although maybe, in fact, the mistake I made by putting the line above rather than below actually makes it look a little less wrong. If you can imagine that upper line under the one underneath it instead of on top, then that in a sense gives more height visually to this triangular section, which would make it look more out of place. So I am quite merciless in critiquing my own work. When I realise I've done something wrong, while I still try and work it to make the drawing look as reasonable as I can, always pay attention to working out exactly what did I do that wasn't as accurate as I wanted it to be. Now we're still within the 10 minutes real-time video. You're still watching me draw this at real time, but we will speed up shortly as we tackle the values involved in the shrubs, the small trees, the grasses, the shadows on the back wall of this building. I was actually at a family wedding that was across the road from this reasonably old school building. And I thought, oh, that's got to be a good subject for something at some time. So this hatching at the moment is for the darker colour of the green. Even though most of this green that we see is actually in fairly bright light, its base colour, its local colour as it's called, is still much darker than the value of the light brown of the sandstone. So we want to show that because that's going to help give the sense of a sunny day. And I'm also decided I want to have a go at doing the shadow on the wall of the school as well, particularly below, but also that shadow on the lower right of the windows. Because this is exactly the sort of drawing where we experiment, where we look at something and we say, I wonder if this would work. And even though it is a 10-minute daily drawing exercise, and what I could have done is I could have stopped drawing this at 10 minutes when I had just a little bit less than what you see now. We are in double time. I could have stopped drawing this then, and then in my next drawing session, I could have done all the hatching and have really concentrated on that hatching as the whole 10-15-minute exercise that I was doing. So we don't want to be too legalistic about these. We don't need to finish what we're doing. If something takes us a bit longer than we thought, and then we think, well, I'd like to try this. Well, try it, but leave it till the next day when we can reset the clock on our 15 minutes, whatever time we set it for, daily drawing. So outlining this fence, I drew it too quickly because I was very much aware of the time running away. So I drew it too quickly and spaced those posts too much on the right-hand side. And that's always what happens if we rush too much. And when we change that, we subtly change the sense of scale. We give a sense that we're closer than we really are, or that the fence is smaller than it really is, which then also messes with how far in front of the building is it and what size is the building as well. Once we change the sense of the relative size of one thing to another in our scene, it really brings an element of visual confusion into what we're looking at. We may still clearly know what it is, but it's hard to get a sense of its proper scale. Or it changes the effective scale of something else, depending what we've got wrong. So now you can see I'm actually cross-hatching, which I don't normally do. I normally just hatch, but for the shadow on the far wall, I'm cross-hatching to make it darker. And that's because it is darker than the leaves that are in sunlight. And now I also think, well, since I'm spending all this time hatching, I'll hatch the shadows that we get behind these windows. It does make them quite dark and a bit clunky with ink. There's a few blotches there, and these semi-dried pens don't work as well doing light hatching. And now you see just my quick hatching to put the mark that I don't want anymore. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this helpful. Doing quick sketches can make adding value a challenge, particularly drawing with pen, where we can still only produce the line. So it's good to practice developing a way of capturing values of various intensities with a pen in a quick, fast drawing. Hope this was interesting. Of course, the photo will be on my channel community page. Why not give it a go? But hey, whatever you draw, however you draw it, values or not, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.